Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, which is called My Journey to Trusteeship. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting session. We've got three panelists who have come to trusteeship in really different ways, who we're going to be hearing from. And the event's going to be chaired by Nigel Kippax, who I'm going to hand over to shortly. But first of all, a bit of housekeeping from me. So I'm Penny, I'm CEO of Getting On Board, and this session is part of our Trustee Learning Programme. I'll put the link in the chat later, but do check it out. We've got lots of completely free sessions, all for and about serving and aspiring trustees. So a few bits of housekeeping. First of all, the session is being recorded. You will receive the recording via a Zoom link, and that recording will include the chat. So you might want to bear that in mind if you're using the chat, which we hope that you do. It will also go onto YouTube. That recording won't include the chat. You've been muted as you arrive. Please stay muted unless you want to ask a question. That's just to keep the airways nice and clear. Closed captions have been made available at our end, so if you want subtitles, please just click closed caption on your device. And please do use the chat. So we'd really love to hear why you've come, what you're hoping to get out of this, questions for our panelists, your own experiences and reflections. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat. And then a final big thank you to our sponsors, Charisma, Starfish, TPP, Peridot and Diversifying Group. They're all agencies that recruit trustees, recruit people like you to trustee boards, and they are very kindly sponsoring this session and lots of other sessions for us so that it's free of charge. So that's it in terms of housekeeping. I'm now going to hand over to Nigel Kippax, who's chairing the session.
Good, thank you, Penny. I like the idea of keeping the airways clear. I'll do my best for that, so I don't croak and so on. Welcome, everyone. This is really more of a conversation, rather than a presentation. It's more of a conversation with three trustees to hopefully share their experiences and learn together, and just pick up some insights that maybe we wouldn't have had before of journeys to trusteeship, why we did it, how we did it, what we learned from it, and so on. And so without further ado, we're lucky enough to have three panelists, Fiona, Jeanette and Callum. And I will jump straight in. And what I'd like to do is just, rather than me introduce each individual, get the individuals to introduce themselves. And which charity are they trustees of or have been trustees of, and so on. And then I'd like you to immediately after that just answer my first question, which is, what is it that sparked your interest in trusteeship initially? What was that initial spark that went, oh, I want to be a trustee? Jeanette, should we start with you? Take the floor. You need to unmute yourself, Jeanette.
Sorry about that, I'm always doing it. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's great to be able to talk to you this afternoon. My name is Jeanette Gower, and my background is marketing communications. And 2 years ago, let's go back a bit further. 6 years ago, I started working for myself as a freelancer. And then two years ago, I was thinking about ways to volunteer in the community. And I found out about the Getting On Board leadership programme, went through it, and then after that, searched for a trustee position. And one of the things that stuck in my mind from the training was look for something that you have a passion for or you've got lived experience in. And I think that's really important. And fortunately, I was able to discover that a local domestic abuse charity called Dash was looking for a trustee. And so I applied, and the rest is history, so to speak. And I've had an interesting journey so far. And I'll go back and talk about that during the call.
So how long have you been a trustee now, Jeanette?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years, just over 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you. We will come back. There's various questions that we'll address as we go on. As I said, it'd be more of a conversation. Fiona, do you want to take the floor?
Hi, I'm Fiona McCausland. Lovely to be here. I am 18 months into my first trustee position, which is with a literacy charity. I went through, I work for Getting On Board, and I also went through the Charity Board Leadership Programme. To answer Nigel's question, what drew me to trusteeship. During the pandemic, I was furloughed from the job that I had before getting on board, and I was helping out at a food bank, a local food bank, and I really enjoyed the work that I was doing, but I had this real sense that there was more that I could offer to the sector and to kind of volunteering. And I didn't really know anything about trusteeship, but I just had the sense of, yes, this is great, but I've got all this other experience. It just seems strange that I'm just not using it in this way. And then when I found out more about trusteeship, which I'll go into when we get into it later, it was just such a perfect match. I was just like, this is what I was looking for. This is something I can do. And to Jeanette's very good point about something that you're passionate about or have lived experience in, I was working in a school, not the job that I was furloughed from, another job that I had, and the charity that I ended up working with, I had we used as a service. So I had seen the good work that they could do with young people, and I was very passionate about that.
Really interesting. So that was there was a period of reflection, that having time to reflect on a career path that allowed you to stand back and kind of question what's next.
Yeah, pretty much, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Callum.
Yeah. What brought me to my trustee position? I'm a trustee at one of the UK's oldest charities. It's called Scots Care colloquially, but our official title is the Royal Scottish Corporation. The charity is 400 years old. So that's where I'm a trustee, and it's a kind of strange but totally true story of how I came to it. I've worked in charities most of my career, almost all of my career. And so I've always known about trustees, but if I'm being brutally honest, haven't always wanted to be on that side of the desk. And I had a job a few years ago where I was doing community organising, working with social workers, trying to get them into positions of influence within government and across the community to empower lots of social workers. And we came across getting on board, and we put I found money to put, I think it's 15 social workers through the Getting On Board training to get them all into trustee positions, because I thought they were terrifically skilled. And during that experience, I think it was a colleague of yours called Leon at the time, saw this position that matched my accent and said, would I have any interest at all in applying to be a trustee of this organisation, being a Scottish person living in London, which this charity is for. And I hadn't really thought at all about becoming a trustee myself, though I'd kind of sat on the training within Getting On Board and supported our social workers. But just Googling them a bit more, getting to know the community, getting in touch a little bit as I get older with my own culture, of my family, I thought, why not give it a go? And I've got lots of skills to bring to the position. And serendipitous that I interviewed were the very first board members, trustees, to be hired outside of the private members club for Scottish people. So that was quite an interesting kind of experience as a trustee to this organisation. And so that's how I'm a trustee today for that charity.
Interesting. So on that journey, Callum, are there any surprises, anything that you kind of thought, oh, I didn't expect that along the way?
Yeah, I've worked in quite large charities, national charities, but I think it is just the immense amount of tradition in the charity that I'm a part of, and the policies and guidelines and ways of working and doing that that happen in our charity. I've got lovely, positive kind of relationships with a number of the trustees, not all of them, because it's not always possible. But I think, yeah, the things that are surprising for me is, I suppose, how much if any of you in the audience work in charities yourself or know about charities right now, just the level of knowledge that trustees get and what you can actually absorb, interpret, make decisions about. So being on the other side of the table and trying to get that balance between the operational person I've always been, but now as a trustee, has been a challenge that has been really new to me. And if I'm being very honest, and that might go into other questions, I think things I didn't expect really was just, again, like not having been from London, having worked in charities, I wouldn't say that I'm kind of high up on that social class. And I think interacting with people in the trustee group, which, as I said before, is a great group, but they come from very different backgrounds, very different lives to me. And so just interacting in that way has been something I didn't expect to kind of hit me as hard as it did, but it has.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that private members club kind of background. Did you kind of feel there were kind of pros and cons to that? There were kind of opportunities created, but maybe things that held the charity back?
Yeah, for sure. That's why I quite like the direction they're going in there. They recognize kind of some of the limitations there. So the private members club, it's not secret. The Caledonian Club, for anyone who's got Scottish background, is the members club for Scottish people in London. And obviously there's a fee and things like that to join that organization. And I do think that it meant that many of the trustees didn't necessarily have an idea of the population and the lived experience of the people that we were serving, and maybe didn't understand quite openly kind of what good impact was, and what it meant, to not have a soup kitchen, but to empower people to make decisions in their lives, and what real impact could mean for the populations and the people that we were serving. And so that has meant that they've brought in people with a wider range of experiences. But, it has its own unique challenges too, because there's a reason sometimes that I think trustee boards have those connections to powerful people and people who are well connected, because, it makes things like fundraising sometimes easier, policy things that you want to get adopted as part of your charitable outlook. So it swings and roundabouts. So I think it has meant that we've got a more diverse board than we've ever had before, potentially in 400 years of history, which is very interesting.
Sounds like there's some significant change going on in this charity, and you're kind of right at the center of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Yeah. I don't know if I can bear all of that responsibility myself. That's one of the parts of, thank goodness, there's 14 other trustees in our organization. So it's a bit of a shared burden, and a very good CEO that I got on well with.
Yeah, good. Maybe one day they'll take on an English trustee as well.
No, I don't think that. I think that's against our rules. Actually, there's one or two English people in the
there
board.
Are limits. There are limits.
Yeah.
So, Jeanette, your journey, was anything kind of jumped out and thought, oh, I really didn't expect that, or
well, yes, actually, because basically when I started on the board, there were let's sort of fast forward to now. There's only 3 people on the board who were there when I started. There's been a huge amount of change. There's been a new CEO, a new fundraising strategy. An awful lot has happened in the last 2 years. And what I found is that, first of all, I was attending the board and meetings, and as you do, and contributing to debates about things. And then I got more involved on a personal basis. The reason for that is because I had time to do it, and because the offices of the charity is very close to where I live. So I was able to pop in and go to company meetings and just support them where I could. Just to sort of recap the journey, I ended up becoming much more involved than I expected. I was involved in the recruitment of the current CEO, and I've acted as a mentor to her. And the chair of the charity invited me to become vice chair, which I now am. And she's going on maternity leave for a year next month, and she's asked me to take over as interim chair. So that's a really sort of accelerated journey to being a vice chair. So I've still got a lot to learn, but what I found was that I expected to use my marketing communication skills during as a trustee, which I have, but the skills which I've used most of all are management and leadership skills. And I've really enjoyed being able to impart wisdom and help someone on their own journey as well, particularly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the skills you thought you were bringing to the board weren't necessarily the ones you ended up using in the board. Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. And that you mentioned that kind of turnover of board trustees, which often happens. How much of that manifested itself as a kind of downside risk, and how much of it was actually an opportunity for change?
I think it was the latter. I think there were a few people. The reason people stood down was very varied. They didn't want to, but they either moved out the area or they had family responsibilities, whatever it was. There was another very good trustee who left because she was doing a training course and she knew she wouldn't be able to devote the time. She may come back in about 2 years' time. But I think it has been a good opportunity for change, because one of the things I didn't mention was that I was managing a recruitment program for trustees as well.
Right.
And we now have a very diverse mix of people, which perhaps we didn't have before. They were too closely aligned. And now we have a diverse board, which I think is very good. It is healthy to have that.
Okay, so you're actually managing to affect quite a lot of change in this charity over
Yes,
the 2 years you've been there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Fiona, surprises along the way?
Yes, very similar to Jeanette, actually. I didn't expect to become vice chair of the charity and be chair of the governance, the HR and governance committee as well, because that's something that's relatively a newish part of my professional life. And so that's something that trajectory, I think, is quite surprising. And I think that is a real reflection of what can happen on a board as opposed to what happens in your professional life. I think so you can just jump really quickly in your paid job. I think it is something that is quite particular to trusteeship, and that getting that breadth of experience across quite a lot of different areas as well is I think is something that has been quite surprising. It's funny because there are certain things, particularly from having done this charity board leadership program, that we talked about quite a lot, but actually having them play out in real time has still been quite surprising. Like some of the things that we learned, like the phrase that I always like, I'm borrowing it from one of Getting Boards Associates, Darcy Mayers, is the noses in, fingers out idea of trusteeship, that you are really there to be strategic and not operational. And it was something that was really impressed upon us in the charity board leadership program, and that's something that finding that balance and having to sort of reassert that balance gently, I think that's a surprise. I kind of felt that it was something that was just more, I suppose, something that's a bit more stable, but obviously it's going to be something that's very dynamic, and obviously it's going to be something that changes from month to month depending on what you're working on. So holding that in mind and really trying to use that as my kind of North Star as a trustee, so I really try and do the best work I can, but not get too much into the weeds of it, or into the weeds of it at all. So that's not my role. That's been something that's been quite surprising.
Yeah, and being able to judge that how much you get involved.
Yeah,
it depends on the size of the organization and whatever. So Jeanette and Fiona, you've both mentioned there that, and funny enough, as it was my experience as well, I joined as the trustee 3 months later. Oh, can you be chair? That's that quick rapid journey to being vice chair, or in your case, Jeanette, taking over as chair during maternity leave. I guess a couple of questions related to that. One, how obliged did you feel to actually say, oh, I better do it? And the second part of that would be, what's the difference? What was the difference being vice chair and just one of the trustees?
Well, no, I didn't feel obligated because I was already doing, as I've mentioned earlier, quite a few different tasks around the charity. So it was a natural progression for me. And I'd managed to, I met a lot of people at the charity through meetings as well. So the fact that that happened wasn't a surprise to people, and they accepted it very quickly. I think that's really important. In fact, that it wasn't put to a vote at a board meeting. It was, what do you think about Jeanette being vice chair? Oh yes, definitely. It's unanimously. So I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't had the board's support.
Yeah. Fiona?
Sorry, what was the other question?
That was it. That was.
That's it. Okay,
well, oh no, sorry. No, there was a second part. The second part was what, in terms of the difference between taking a trustee role and then a chair or vice chair role. What are the key differences there?
Well, it's the time and the additional responsibilities, really. I mean, there are some trustees that just come to board meetings, and that's on our board and others, and don't do anything else. They might read something, or comment on something, but get involved is the message, as much as you are able to. Not feel obliged to do it, but as much as you're able to.
Yeah. Fiona?
That's what I would advise.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeanette.
You get more out of it. It's more rewarding that way as well.
The more you put in, the more you get out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with the more you put in, the more you get out, definitely. I think the difference to being a trustee is that there is a specific remit for the vice chair role. It's a new role, and it's partly we've said that going with the role, the vice chair will be the kind of head up the HR and governance, but it's also very much about looking at the board culture. And making sure that we have a pretty good board culture, but making sure that we're enshrining that in policies and codes of conduct. So it's not just sitting with the people who are around the board table at the moment, because that's a real danger, I think, with boards, that you have a really good balance, then necessarily the board changes. If you're a healthy board, it's going to. And then if things do start to go wrong, you haven't got a way back because you just haven't put any of this down. So that's, for me, that's the difference, is that there's a very specific role. And I did think quite carefully about taking it on, because I have a habit for sticking my hand up too quickly, and I don't want to take on more stuff that I can't do justice to. But I do think that I can deliver this, and maybe if we have when we talk about other parts of it, I think this is part of the legacy that I want to leave the board with. When I think about not being on that board forever, that I want to leave it with these policies, so that's very much my kind of thinking for taking it on.
Yeah. So for you, did it feel easier to have that quite defined specific role in the board rather than a kind of free remit?
No, because when I was recruited with 3 other people, and we were all put onto different committees as part of our onboarding and induction. So I always was going to have a role. I think this is a remove, though, because I like Jeanette, actually, I was expecting to use my comms and marketing skills more, and I am using those. But suddenly sort of having this and having the chair and the CEO recognise the skill set that I have in that, which really has only been developed over the last few years of working with getting on board, that was quite surprising to suddenly to have other people look at that and to say, no, we really need those skills here. And so that was something that's been really rewarding, actually, about the work, and and sort of surprising. And that, what I say, is the sort of main difference of being a trustee who's just sitting on one of those committees and then suddenly having this additional responsibility.
Okay. Helen, aspirations to take on the vice chair's role at RSC?
Maybe one day, I don't know yet. Like everything moves a wee bit slower in our charity, but perhaps one day.
Yeah. Okay. So while we're on Callum, so if I said to you, what was the best and worst thing about being a trustee, how would you answer that?
I think for someone like myself whose career has been in charities, I think that ability to influence is really empowering for someone who, I've been in more leadership positions now within charities, but for younger trustees, which charities are crying out for at the moment, in diversity within their boards, I think that ability, to take a very different role. And if I'm being very honest as well, giving advice and not having to do it, that's quite a privilege as a trustee, so I can't say that I don't mind that, because in my day-to-day job, I get advice from other people and then I have to go and implement it. So I think that that's a lovely part of the job. I think they're just hard parts of the job, because depending on the size of your board, you have and your CEO, you may have an opinion, you may think something's really important, but you have to kind of influence, convince, or kind of build a coalition to kind of see that through. And so I would say, there are 1 or 2 times that, so I sit on our service delivery board, and I sit on our communications and marketing board. And I've offered a few suggestions sometimes, or picked up on something in the papers that have been shared. And I think it is so out of the frame of reference for other board members or trustees that my points kind of fallen flat. and that never feels very good as a trustee. And so, you know, I know kind of just my kind of coaching or connecting with other people, or even just getting the thoughts of the CEO, how important it is, you know, it's you have to be in the room where it happens. And sometimes the decision about whether or not we're going to go in a particular direction does not happen at those committee meetings. They happen at the cup of coffee that you have with your fellow trustees before or afterwards. And so I think that's something I really like. I'm an extrovert, and I really enjoy getting to know some of our other trustees because they're very interesting people with interesting backgrounds. I suppose that's my last thing is I've joined this board kind of personally because it's a culture that, you know, it's about me. And so I've made friends and social connections. I didn't know all these, you know, people who share a similar background or culture to me all live in this city. So they've all been really, really nice things that this charity means something to me.
So good learning opportunity, good social opportunity, challenges in those relationships and that collective decision-making ethos. Yeah, interesting.
I think a lot of the times trustee boards don't necessarily have as many service delivery experts as you might think, especially I think if you're coming from a private sector. Often the trustees, I feel like, are weighted more on that legal governance private sector experience, which can mean if you've got a lived experience, or you've got operational experiences, maybe as a social worker, a policy person, it can be quite, you can feel isolated sometimes on that board, and those are really difficult things. And so finding supports within, I've had to find my allies within our trustee board, even though it's a positive place to be. You want to have your go-to people, and then I need them outside as well, because I think I might be the youngest, not anymore, but until very recently I was the youngest trustee by about 30 years, and so to find a peer was difficult.
Yeah, again, you mentioned that getting the voice of the beneficiary into the decision making, so important. But if you're the only one, that's a real challenge. You also mentioned that you mentioned about, you know, that new role, the learning out of your comfort zone and so on. So you know, if there are any talent directors, HR directors listening in, this is what we do with corporate employers. We tie in path to trusteeship with talent development, emerging talent, and because it's extremely effective experiential leadership, and can be quite cost effective as well. So yeah, thank you for that plug, Callum. I appreciate that. Fiona, the best and worst of it.
One of the best things has been because of that board diversity. Like, I think when we talk about board diversity, and because sort of EDI and diversity has a particular perception at the moment, we tend to think, I think that we quite often think in terms of ethnicity, or we might think in terms of gender or something. But actually, for me, being on a board with people from the corporate sector has been really, really valuable. And I've learned quite a lot. Like, even quite recently, there was a board meeting and there was something I wanted to bring up. And I sort of weighed up, how best shall I bring it up? And I kind of like tossed it around. And then when the meeting started, this other person just went straight in and brought it up in a really, really direct way and said, we need to get this sorted. This has just gone on now. We just need to get this sorted. And I just thought, yeah, I just need to learn from that. So I was trying to coach it in this way or that way. And it's just like, no one was offended. No one took it as a criticism of their work. They just understood that, yes, we've been coming now for 3 board meetings and this has cropped up, and now we need to get it sorted. And I know that it will be. And I was able to add my voice to it, but that was a real learning that I took. So having that exposure to really different types of people, that's been one of the best things. And it's interesting hearing Callum talk about being friends with people on this board, because I would say that I'm not actually friends with anyone on the board. I really respect them and I enjoy working with them. And that for me is quite rare as well. So I normally pick up friends quite easily in places where I do work, and that's quite interesting to be in that situation and to have a working relationship with a group of people who aren't just necessarily people. I can see we live in different places around the country, there's not opportunities to hang out really, but to still have that really good working relationship is something that's really valuable as well. So I think that those are the best things. I'm just the work as well. It's actually another thing that I really like about it is that I also do some volunteering with the charity as well, which is we're all encouraged to do so that we know how the programme works, which, you know, hopefully lots of charities really encourage that their trustees to do that. So we have that understanding. So I just enjoyed that volunteering. I used to work in a library with secondary school students, so it's really nice to be able to sometimes work with them and choose books for them and help them with their reading and so on. That's really fun. And the other thing, I think, yeah, so those are all the positives. And the one thing I would say on it's not a negative, but I have to be really careful about the time management, and just that is the thing. I think inevitably, if you enjoy doing something, you throw yourself into it, you take on more of it than you necessarily thought you would at the beginning. So that's I think, in terms of advice to people taking on a trustee role, just think about what time you have available for what you've been told you'll need, and then add a percentage on top of that if you want to get the most out of it, and then work out if you have the sort of capability for it.
Yeah, good point. Jeanette, I'll come to you and ask the same question. The best bits and the worst bits in your 2 years.
Before I say that, I totally agree with what Fiona has just said about limiting your time, because you can get really into it and you think, but so I definitely have a limit to what I do, even if it means I have to say no to something that I want to do, because I've still got clients, so I have to think about them. So it's very important to do that. It's easy to get carried away anyway. The best thing, I think, is what I've already talked about, is being able to use my skills to help others is really rewarding. And ultimately, the charity is all about helping women who've experienced domestic abuse. There's lots of ways in which they do that, and be able to see the outcomes of that is the most rewarding thing about being involved. The worst thing is having to read financial reports, because I'm not really a financial person, but I still have to. But I tend to look at the big picture, and we now have a treasurer who is fantastic, so I leave that to her now.
Yeah. Very good.
I still have to understand what's going on, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to ask. I'm going to ask you. Sorry, Callum. Carol.
I was going to add to that, because I share it, like, I try not to be too public about it, but I share your fear for sure, where I'm like, especially we have quite a lot of bankers, financiers on the board, skilled people. And so to have an opinion sometimes on the numbers is the scary bit, but I have to keep like self-talking to myself to say, no, but you have a unique perspective on these numbers that like you can add. And it's getting that balance right of like, I don't want it to be public knowledge almost in my trustee group that like, that might be the more intimidating part of the role for me. But it's definitely an interesting one. For sure.
I think what you've highlighted there for me, Callum, is that sometimes a weakness can be a strength. So if you might not understand the detail of all the finances, but that might be a strength because you're standing back and saying, tell it to me simply. And by asking those questions, and it may start a different conversation with the board and so on. I'm going to hand it over to the chat and questions around the table in a moment. But just let me ask you one more question. You've been through this process of becoming a trustee. You've been a trustee for a little while. Looking back over that time, what's the question you really wished you had asked but didn't? What question do you really wish you'd asked, but I either forgot to ask it, or I didn't realise I needed to ask it, or anyway, between the three of you, who's got a cracking one to kick us off?
I think that's actually quite a difficult question, because I think during the journey you go on, you do ask a lot of questions. And it's difficult to think of one particular thing that I wished I'd asked right up to the beginning, but probably it would be I didn't ask how much time would be required, but that became evident, and I gave the time myself. But I mean, the minimum requirement was attend board meetings.
Okay.
If you don't attend, if you don't, I think we have a rule: if you miss more than 3 meetings in a year, then we would ask the question, do you really want to be involved? That's it really. I can't think of anything else I should have asked, because I've asked it during the period.
Yeah. Callum, did you have a question you wish you'd asked?
Yeah, I think I've gotten lucky with the board that I'm on, but I think especially coming into it, I think there's two things for me I feel like are really important. Is one, really getting to know the CEO before you start, because I think the CEO steers the organization, and it's all about your relationship. Realistically, the number one relationship is with the CEO, you know, what their outlooks are, because I think, and to have that honest, and I like how you said, Fiona, sometimes you just have to get over asking really frank questions. And I think a couple of the questions with the CEO that I would probably ask in my next trusteeship is, you know, what's your career trajectory with this organization? Do you want to be here until you retire? And then in the most delicate way possible, asking about, I like saying the dirty laundry of the organization, but the context of where the organization is at, because the last thing that you want is the minute you sign, you know, your trustee agreement, that then they can start sharing kind of what's going on in the organization. And that's not to say that like you never want to join an organization that's, you know, maybe going through some turbulence or change, because actually that can be a really cool opportunity as a trustee to help get a charity to where it wants to be. But I think right charity for the right person at the right time. If you've got loads of responsibilities on at the moment, you probably want to be a trustee with a stable organization that's delivering their program well. If you do want to do that, like you shared, Nigel, that opportunity for career aspiration, join a charity that's in the middle of change. You will be exposed to so many different experiences, you know, with limited kind of liability on yourself personally. And so I think it is just being confident to be able to ask the CEO about themselves, what their style is, how they work, and also, you know, ask about their relationship with the other trustees and the dynamics of the board right now. Is that a board that they are looking, or like that they want to completely change up? Are there, you know, who's well connected? You know, who do they think should be the next chairs? Those, I feel like, are the most insightful questions that it's very difficult to understand by looking at the website of the charity or the numbers or the papers or the constitution that they share with you. You can only find that out by just having frank conversations with potentially the chair and the CEO.
I think that's remarkable. Remarkable. It's very excellent insight. And that relationship between, you know, executive and board, it's the one relationship that will kill a charity if it's not right. So I think you're absolutely right. Fiona, was there anything that sprung to mind for you?
No, I think that what Callum said, really, I think that those are really good points. I think, yeah, if I go into another trusteeship, I will really spend some time talking to the CEO as much as the chair, because that CEO relationship is really crucial. And I think if I was going to narrow it down to specifics, I mean, I think I just want to sit with them and just have a bit more of a conversation than perhaps you do if you're going through a recruitment process. Is, yeah, how do you work with the board currently? How would you like to work with the board? You know, and try and get a sense of, is there a massive differential between those two things, or are they getting what they need? And then, yeah, just sort of have a feel around and see what that dynamic looks like, and make sure that I can fit into that, or bring, not necessarily fit in, you don't always want to fit in, but I can bring what's going to be useful to the charity and the charity's mission to it, because that might be something quite different to what they're recruiting on or what they're looking to me to bring, and make sure that that's going to work. Because I think the last thing you want to do is join a charity and then leave quite quickly because it's just not a great fit, or it wasn't what you were expecting, because that just helps no one. And I think because it's not a job interview, you do have the right to ask those sorts of questions and spend a bit of time doing that. And I think that if I go on to another charity, if I'm a trustee again, so obviously I'm not going to be at this charity forever, it's, you know, 6 years maximum, 2 terms of 3. I would have the confidence now to do that. And if I was met with a bit of a wall, that would be my red flag, and it would be like, okay, this one isn't a match for me.
Good questions on due diligence. I personally reflected on this. I think 2 of the questions I feel I should have asked were to the board that was there is, and when do you intend to step down? Because the answer was tomorrow, and I didn't know. And the second question was, in terms of security of income, what does it look like beyond 6 months? And the answer was nothing. I didn't realise that either. But then you end up in kind of, whoa, sink or swim. It actually turned out to be very enjoyable. But with hindsight, those would be two of my due diligence questions. Let's go out to the audience. Penny, you've been monitoring the chat and questions on there. Any? I'm sure there are one or two great ones that want to be asked.
We had one from Chris, but I think you didn't see it, Nigel, but you immediately asked the same question as soon as he typed it. So
oh, I did. I've got read it aloud. Oh, that's a good question. I'll ask that and pretend it was mine.
Very good, very good. Sorry, Chris. I've got a question, which is, did panelists, did your younger selves think that you'd ever become a charity trustee? And particularly given, you know, Callum literally came to a trustee course thinking he was doing it for colleagues, not for himself. So yeah, did you ever think you'd become a trustee? Did you even know what a trustee was?
I can answer it quickly to say I definitely knew what a trustee was, but if I'm gonna be super honest here. I think the image of a trustee in my head, having worked in charities, was you know, that's a job for much later in your career, when you're executive level, when you're maybe you've got more free time, you've done lots of strategic work. So in my career trajectory, is like maybe one day, but not right now. It doesn't work for me right now. And yeah, as I say, it was only through a positive network and a great connection through LinkedIn that I considered it. And now I'm like, I run a research company, and I've told all my young staff who are 24, 23 years old, they'll be watching this video and they'll be strongly encouraged to join trustee groups.
Good. Jeanette, how would you answer Penny's question?
Well, I certainly didn't know what a trustee was until a few years ago. I'd never worked for, or I've looked alongside charities when I was at the Chamber of Commerce that I worked for, but no, I wasn't really aware of what a trustee was. And the other thing, I think probably a lot of people think that charity trustees are older people who are retired or they've got time or whatever, but I think it's important that a board reflects society as a whole, and that if, like you're doing, Callum, there should be a wide age range so that people can grow through their time at the charity. I think I'd like to see that happening with ours. There aren't any younger people at the moment, but I would like to see that happening. When I say younger, I mean, you know, 18 to 30 perhaps. Everybody on our board is over 30. I'd like to see some younger people. Yeah.
Fiona.
Yeah, I think I would just echo what other people have said on that point, actually. Yeah, I don't think there's anything more that I would add on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the challenges and rewards of trusteeship then?
I think it's hugely rewarding, in so many ways, in a funny sort of way, in the way that people who don't know about trusteeship sort of, it feels like it's quite sort of mystifying. I think that the rewards, in a similar way, they're just so vast. I suppose specifically, if I had to think about them, I've just learned so much about different areas that I just knew nothing about. Certainly finances, just having to read financial papers. I echo what Jeanette and Callum said. I find it quite challenging, and I do have to make myself ask those questions. And if they're questions that everyone else thought of and understood from the papers, great. I didn't, and you know, I will just be absolutely fine with that. Learning about things that are specific to our charity. It's a literacy charity. It has an education program. Learning about how that's put together is just really interesting. And whilst it's quite niche and not necessarily something that I would work in professionally again, so I'm probably not going to work in education again professionally. It's just really interesting seeing how that component of something is validated, how the data is collected for it, how it's evidenced. And I think that there'll be some transferable skills there as well. And just delivering on the mission. I mean, the moments when you get to see the impact of it when we had a fundraiser and some of the young people who'd gone through the program sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago spoke on the stage, and just hearing them just being able to reflect on their own experiences, and when they entered the program that they weren't confident with their reading, they weren't confident with their writing, that they learned how to, it gave them a sense of self-possession and voice, and that they attributed it very much to that particular part of the program, not just their schoolwork. It was just amazing to really see that impact, and think that sometimes you sort of almost lose sight of that when you're doing the board work, but just to have that moment when you get the opportunity to sit back and just think, yeah, all those little decisions that we're making, all that work that we're doing about how to communicate with schools and how to, you know, who to address an email to make sure you get the cut through, all those sorts of things that I can offer advice on, because I've been in that situation from a school, to looking at the board papers and working out about, you know, looking at reserves and all the other things that I knew nothing about before trusteeship, to be able to see how all of that comes together to deliver impact. That's, you know, that is really rewarding. And the one thing I would say, actually, just adding to the sort of earlier point about perception of trusteeship beforehand, I suppose in a similar way, I didn't know what trusteeship was. It felt just very inaccessible. I suppose I was going to sum it up. I think the two things that I thought about it previously was, there was somebody who, a friend who had been a trustee of a sort of a children's sort of storytelling centre that I think her children went to quite a lot, and I was quite sort of jealous of it. I was like, that sounds exciting and interesting, no idea how to get into it. And she had been asked to become a trustee of that, and then I remember having a conversation with somebody else, and we were both sort of loosely talking, didn't really know very much about trusteeship, but saying it was something we were quite interested in. And the person I was talking to, who was like really senior editor of a really, you know, sort of like one of the biggest women's magazines in the country, was just like, oh, we won't be able to get something like that. It's never sort of people like us who gets that. It's just they go to sort of, it's sort of, you know, men who in their 60s and 70s who are trustees. And she just said it very matter of factly, and I kind of like nodded at part. I just remember just nodding, just going, yeah, and just not having any sense that that was completely incorrect, could be challenged, where we would go to get the skills to do that. So yes, I feel that that's, you know, happily I've left those days behind.
Good. I'm going to just ask you each one more question, but I'm going to leave sufficient time for Penny to kind of close off, and in that summary to say, if somebody's interested in trusteeship and finding a place, what to do next, where do you go, you know, and I'm sure Penny can provide the guidance on that. What I wanted just to leave the final question for you is that as being a trustee, you were there for a limited time, and whether it's 3 years, whether it's 6 years or whatever, so you're entrusted with the assets of the charity, hence being a trustee. And the question is, you know, what you do with those assets while you're a trustee kind of is really important. What would you really like to hand back that was different in your charity, Callum, after your time? What would you like to hand back that was different?
Yeah, I would say it's so my kind of career expertise is research and policy. So I think it is giving comfort to the charity that I'm a part of, that they really are making evidenceable impact on the Scots in poverty that they're trying to support across London. And I think the other thing I'm trying to do, because I can see some of the questions in the chat there, and I would love to kind of half answer them too in my response, is I suppose showing to I think our CEO is on board, but showing to the other trustees that it is not scary to have people with lived experience on the board, and it is effective, and it means that our services are better. And I think the way that I found that, just reading one of the stories in the chat there, I think, which was about being whether you're the only young person, you're potentially the only kind of representative of a community or a minority group. It's finding an ally, finding a friend, getting the CEO's help to kind of buddy you up. And I think that's the way that I feel like I will leave my assets, because if I just bring myself and I'm an individual contributor as a trustee, I haven't had that much impact, and I don't think my messages get across. And so if I want to leave that feeling that having lived experience on the board is going to work, having program expertise, social work expertise, research expertise, it works. It's not scary. The only way I'm going to kind of leave that is by having a couple of really good. I'm not going to be friends with every single trustee, but if I have a good trusting relationship with one or two, those messages and those assets are going to kind of leave. And I suppose it's exciting for me because I've never been a part of an organization that's so old, and that if I can have any impact at all on an organization that's 400 years old, that's enough. That's enough.
Right. Now, Jeanette, what would you like to leave behind as your legacy after your time as a trustee?
Well, I think I want to, when I leave the charity, I'd like to see that people are working together more. I'm talking about the board and the staff. They're not really doing that at the moment, and I've got to work out ways in which I can make that happen, and I've got some ideas. But I think the buddying idea is a good one, because when people start, I mean, when I joined, I had some onboarding training about what the charity did and spoke to some people, and that was it. There was nothing else after that. So the first meeting that I went to was a bit daunting, because it was all online like we are now. We're used to it now, but then it was fairly new. And once I got used to that, it improved. But I mean, all our meetings were online because everyone lives in different places. I'm sure everyone else would find that as well. But once you can navigate your way through that, and I'm looking for different ways to do that, as I said earlier. So
well, those are relationships, and that established relationships working together. Fiona,
exactly.
what would you like your legacy to be?
I think it would be around board culture. I would really like just the work that I'm doing, really, just to make sure that what's good about our board culture is codified in some way, is one thing. And I mean, I was very lucky to go to a board that had very good practices in place anyway. So just make sure that they are upheld and continued. And I think there's a piece of work within the charity itself around volunteering. So I think lots of charities do really find getting volunteers a challenge. So to be part of setting us on a really strong path with that would be something that I'd really want to be part of that as well, and to see that.
Yeah. So, well, from my point of view, just rounding off from my point of view, thank Jeanette, Callum, Fiona, thanks ever so much for your input. That's I feel it's a bit of a conversation between the four of us, which has been great. I'm going to hand back to Penny. Penny, do you want to kind of wrap that up with your thoughts and offer some advice on for participants what they might do next?
Yeah, sure. And we've got you've seen lots of questions in the chat about how do you become a trustee if you're not asked, from Rukasana and Kirsten. So I've put in the chat a link to Getting On Board's free guide, How to Become a Charity Trustee. It's all in there. There's all in there about how to use adverts, how to make speculative approaches, because we know lots of trustee roles are never advertised, how to put your application together and so on. So please do have a look at our guide. It also includes where trustee roles are advertised, and you can find a page of links on our website. But in summary, Google is your friend, because the normal Google search will pick up Google jobs, which will mine all of those listings for advertised trustee roles. There's some questions there about onboarding. And I think back to Fiona's point about it's not like a job. So you're being very demanding when you're interviewing for a trustee role. You should be really demanding about your own onboarding as well. So if you find that you're not getting a good induction, absolutely ask for one. That is the behaviour of a good trustee. And there's some stuff in our guide and in our regular webinar about what you might expect from a good onboarding. And then in terms of onboarding, also use Getting On Board's free webinars. This is one of them. I put a link to our wider programme in the chat. We've got an absolutely cracking programme coming up for our autumn season, which will be going live over the next month or so. We have finance for trustees, legal responsibilities of trustees, Nigel talking about no more charity governance, please. So you can use Getting On Board and other charities that support charities, I guess, for the generic stuff, but you'll still need an onboarding from your own charity. And then the final thing I was going to say is, forgive me because I can't remember who said this, but somebody had a not a very nice experience as a school governor. And you're quite right to leave that, Katie, I think it was, you know, good for you for actually just walking away. But I think that sense of being brave as a trustee, it really, I've heard other trustees talk about how it's not about us as individuals, it's about the organisation, and everything we do when we're brave, and like Fiona was saying about asking the direct question, is actually because we are entrusted to do our best by the organisation and its beneficiaries. And I think that mindset can really help us if we're speaking out and thinking about the best thing. It's helpful to think in that way. So Fiona, I noticed you unmuted, which made me think you had something to add.
No, I didn't. I think everything was covered hopefully from I just had a quick scan through the questions in the chat, and I think you got everything. There's this one from Kirsten about trustee roles and where are they advertised, and I said that I did follow it. She was asking about the charity that I found, and I think that was a LinkedIn connection, so I'd recommend just following the ones you like on LinkedIn, checking the websites, and also just direct approach. We really encourage open recruitment, but that's, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't do a direct approach as well, just as long as you have a recruitment process and you are interviewed alongside other people. But, you know, always ask, and when charities are ready to recruit, they can get back in contact with you. So yeah, I think and I think following the charities that you like checking on their website, seeing what their output is, just gives you a really good sense of, is this the place where I want to work? Because sometimes you see something, it might not be, but it might lead you to the place that is. So yeah.
Thank you.
Your sponsors as well, Penny. It was Perdo and Partners that helped me get my role, and I got coaching and support for the interviews and follow up afterwards. I don't work for them or anything like that, but it was helpful at the time.
Yeah, and I'll name check some of those in a minute, actually, Callum. So thank you all. I personally found that a completely fascinating conversation. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Callum, Jeanette, and Fiona for giving your time to this. Thank you to all of our attendees who've asked some really cracking questions. And I put a link to our evaluation form in the chat. So please tell us what you thought of this session, and tell us what else you need as well. So there's a space in the form to tell us what other sessions you'd find helpful. So just to name check the sponsors, particularly for people who are looking to become trustees, because as Callum says, these organisations can be really helpful to you. So they were, and this will be in your follow-up email, by the way, Charisma, Diversifying Group, Peridot, Starfish and TPP. They all recruit absolutely loads of trustee roles. Now, they tend to be on the larger side because obviously those charities are paying them to recruit trustees. So don't think that's the full picture, but they're certainly very helpful organisations. Yes, so thank you all for coming. Have a lovely evening, and we'll be sending you the recording in the next few days. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.